Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a pretty incredible journey, the evolution of India's environmental governance. We're going to trace how a massive, rapidly developing nation completely transformed its approach, going from reactive domestic protection all the way to proactive global climate leadership. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, from tragedy to policy. Then, national climate action. Next, shaping global agreements. And finally, leading the renewable revolution.
Section 1. From Tragedy to Policy, the Domestic Catalyst. To really understand India's position today, we actually have to start with a deeply human, incredibly local event. The true catalyst for modern environmental governments in India was the Bhopal gas tragedy. It was a devastating shock to the system. It forced the nation to wake up and realize their current framework just wasn't equipped to handle rapid industrialization. I mean, this tragedy literally changed everything.
And that brings us to 1986. Just 2 short years after the tragedy, the government responded definitively. They enacted the landmark Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Now, this was all about giving the central government sweeping, unprecedented authority. Suddenly, they actually had the mandate to regulate pollution, protect vulnerable ecosystems, and strictly enforce standards. And you know what? Decades later, this essentially remains India's primary toolkit to ensure that development doesn't come at the cost of basic human safety.
Section 2. National Climate Action, the National Strategy. So we're moving away from reactive laws designed to just prevent disaster and shifting toward proactive planning. Fast forward a bit, more than 2 decades actually, and we arrive at 2008. This was a massive forward-thinking step for domestic policy.
In 2008, India launched the National Action Plan on Climate Change, or the NAPCC. Now, what's really interesting about this plan is the sheer scale and the variety of the missions it outlines. It's not just looking at one tiny sector. No, it outlines 8 distinct national missions. So it pushes heavily into solar energy and efficiency, sure, but it also tackles sustainable agriculture and water conservation. It's the whole shebang. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the NAPCC integrated climate adaptation and mitigation directly into India's core development planning. This is the critical turning point. Climate action was no longer just sitting over there in some environmental silo. It was fundamentally woven directly into how the country grows, how it feeds its people, and how it builds infrastructure.
Section 3. Shaping Global Agreements, the Global Advocate. Now, as India was busy organizing its domestic strategy, it was simultaneously stepping onto the world stage. They actually became a highly active participant in global diplomacy very early on. In 1987, they were part of the Montreal Protocol to phase out ozone-depleting substances. By 1992, they were right there at the Rio Summit introducing sustainable development, and they joined the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then came 1997. It was at the 1997 Kyoto Protocol where India really solidified its specific diplomatic voice. While the protocol established binding targets for developed nations, India fiercely advocated for equity and this vital principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Basically, they argued that, yes, all nations share responsibility for the climate, we're all in this together. But developed nations, who historically cause way more of the problem, they must carry a larger burden of the solution. Section 4. Leading the Renewable Revolution, the Global Leader.
All right, let's move to and see how this builds, because this is really the climax of our story. It's a stark, super impressive contrast. Back in 1997, India was primarily advocating for equity, right? They were pushing developed nations to take the lead. But jump to 2015, and they are pledging their own incredibly ambitious renewable energy targets. They completely shifted from demanding action from others to leading by example.
The stage for this transformation was, of course, the 2015 Paris Agreement. This agreement marked a universal commitment to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and India played a critical role in this universal commitment, not just by signing it, but by specifically stepping up with those incredibly ambitious renewable energy pledges we just mentioned.
And honestly, nothing illustrates that new leadership role better than the International Solar Alliance. Launched in 2015 and co-founded alongside France, this initiative targets tropical countries all around the world to promote widespread solar energy adoption. This perfectly symbolizes India's evolution. They're actively organizing international coalitions to build a greener future. It proves, without a doubt, that developing nations can actually set the pace for global climate tech.
So, to summarize the core takeaways from today, the trajectory here is just incredible. We're looking at a journey from reactionary national legislation all the way to proactive global cooperation. India is basically demonstrating a masterclass in how a developing nation can balance urgent, necessary economic development with the shared responsibilities of planetary stewardship.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this to ponder. Can India maintain this delicate balance between rapid economic development and global climate leadership in the decades to come? It's arguably the ultimate challenge of the 21st century, and honestly, how India navigates it is going to impact every single one of us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep asking great questions.